Hello and welcome to Coproduce Care Chat. Today we have the wonderful Sophie Coulthard, who is part of Judgement Index and also has a fantastic podcast about all things care and all things about outstanding care. So welcome, Sophie. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So what we usually ask people to do when they first come on is just explain a bit about you, who you are, and the projects and organisations you're involved with to do with care.
So I think probably the easiest thing that people know me from is the podcast, which is called The Road to Outstanding, which is available on all kind of podcast platforms, and there's a lot of episodes there, all interviews with people working in care. So I just ask them all the questions about how they've got to where they've got to, all about sharing best practice. So that's what I think a lot of people would know me from. I work for a company called Judgement Index, so we're a family business, me and my dad, and we do a few different things. So we deliver training to care companies, but more leadership training rather than the kind of compulsory type training that you find. So we do leadership academies and workshops. The Judgement Index itself is actually an assessment that we use, and care companies use it as part of their kind of values-based recruitment, and also for development with staff as well.
That's so interesting. So the Judgement Index is almost like a product in itself.
Yes.
That organisations can use to assess how the organisation is doing in terms of valuing staff and retention, recruitment.
Yes, so they use it. So a lot of people might be familiar with, as an example, the NHS values-based questionnaire, which people might take at interview if they were going for an NHS type job. So it's an assessment that you take normally prior to your interview, and the company will then use that as part of their interview process. So it will help direct some questions for them. And really it looks at values-based behaviours, so it's quite different from a personality type assessment. But because values-based behaviours can change over time, that's what makes it really good for a development tool. So useful for appraisals, useful for if you're looking for areas of actually what training do I need to give to my staff. We often get a phone call from people saying we need some team bonding, but actually once they've all taken the assessment, and when you look at how they are, it's not team bonding that they need. It might be, I don't know, assertiveness training or help support with their self-esteem, things like that. So it helps with that side of things.
So how did you come to thinking about Judgement Index? Because actually, I think that's a really interesting tool to use for organisations, like you say, throughout the lifetime of working with a member of staff.
Yeah.
Because you often get to know someone a little bit through job interviews, but finding out what their values are, it's a really tricky sort of type of recruitment. And it's values-based recruitment is really popular now, but often knowing how do you actually do that is one of the big challenges.
Yes. I can see care companies are really embracing values-based recruitment, and Skills for Care do a lot of great work on it as well, about asking these types of questions. I think what most care companies have said to me at one point or another is, I interviewed somebody, they came across great in the interview. 3 weeks later after they've started, I think, who is this person? And that's the thing, I think, particularly if people have worked in care for a long time and they've been around and they've worked in different places, they know how to answer interview questions. They know what to expect. So this tool is useful because it helps you to delve, we always say, under the surface, what's behind the mask of the person sat in front of you. And if you can find that at interview, it will help you make a more objective decision. And I think what I see a lot with care, do you know what, across all sectors, to be honest, is we can get different biases when we're interviewing as well. So somebody comes in, they're on time, they've got all the qualifications, they kind of tick a lot of boxes for you, and you almost have that predetermined bias when you interview them. And sometimes things that could be red flags, they won't come to the surface because you want to give this person a job already. But also on the other side of that, somebody might come in for a job who hasn't worked in care before, could be very nervous in the interview, could actually have all the great qualities to be an awesome care professional, but is on the surface is very nervous, and you might then not give them a job. So it can help highlight both sides. I'm always quite keen to say it's not all about spotting negative, it can be about spotting the positive as well.
And also, presumably, it's about matching that person's values to the values of the organisation. So finding someone's values is actually crucial, because you can think, well, they might be really, really good on paper, but are they actually going to fit into the way that we do things?
Yes.
So it's actually really useful in that way. And if people wanted to get involved or find out more about it, is it something that they would contact Judgement Index about?
Yes.
And then a tool that you help them use throughout?
Yes.
Yeah.
So most of the companies we work with, they use it as part of their hiring process, and then they use it as well with their existing teams, and they use it to develop them. We always will offer to bring it to life for people. I think that's always the best way to do it. Have a sample, show people how it works. But I think even without using a tool like the Judgement Index, there's still a lot of things that people can take away in terms of thinking about how they interview and how they can be more objective with their interviews as well.
And then moving on to the other part of your work is the podcast that you have, the Outstanding Care podcast, is that right? And I think that's one of the first things that introduced me to you. I saw you were tweeting about it, and then you actually interviewed one of our care managers. Yes. And it was fantastic, and it was a great idea to think about interviewing different people who you don't normally hear about, and letting them talk about their experiences. And you've interviewed everyone from chief inspectors of CQC right through to carers, through to somebody who's on Gogglebox.
Yes.
So you've done so much, really, really super interesting. What made you think of doing a podcast like that?
So I'm into podcasts anyway. I'm a bit of a podcast nut, so and I live in London, so you're always travelling about on the tube, and it's great to listen to a podcast to pass the time. And we were actually working with a care company in South London, and they were an outstanding rated company, and the people that we were working with were just awesome and just really, really good fun. And one of them had received outstanding in all 5 areas, and I was chatting with her, and I said, I bet people ask you these sorts of questions all the time. And she said, well, not really. You get a bit of an initial buzz, maybe a little bit of press, and that's kind of it. And I thought she had so many good stories about how they'd achieved it, what they felt contributed towards the outstanding rating, how they got support to get that outstanding rating. And I thought, how can we capture all of this? And and the one thing that she said to me that really stood out was, she said, you sometimes go to outstanding type events, and it's everybody who is outstanding in a room together. And she said she sat in one of these events and thought, this should be being shared outside these 4 walls, not just inside. And I just went away, and my brain started ticking.
You got
and
it. Then you were like, that is the sign.
How can we do this? So, I thought, how difficult can it be to start a podcast? So I started. I interviewed a few people, picked up on my contacts, but I was really keen, and I know you go to a lot of social care events as well. And you do see the same people, and I know it's important, and they're great at what they do, but sometimes it's, how can we hear from somebody who is a frontline carer, who is an activities coordinator, who is a chef in a care home, and hear about their stories and their experiences. So it's all about sharing the positive. What can people take away and go and put into practice? If they're going to spend that 30 minutes or so listening, what can they take away from it? So it's really been really, really good fun.
Such an inspirational idea. I've got some stats. One of the stats is there's been 17,000 downloads of your podcast, specifically over the last year.
Yes.
So, and from all over the world. So it's international.
Yeah, it's great to go and have a look at your stats and kind of geek out a little bit and say, oh, somebody's listened in Guatemala. How is that somebody that works in care that's on holiday? Or is it spreading like that? And I think that's the best thing about this type of media, and what you're doing here really is that it can live on. But 60 episodes, tons of interviews with different people, and people don't need to start somewhere. They can find something that they think they would find interesting.
Yeah, exactly. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, and dive in.
Are there any common issues that you find crop up in your podcast or even in your work, although it's probably slightly different questions, but that people are coming up with that they're either facing or are concerned about in social care? Is there anything that you've, through those 60 interviews, that you found as being quite a common issue?
I think it's tricky with issues because the podcast is, although we do touch on issues, it's more about sharing the positives. So I think people are coming on and they're more sharing that the good things that have worked rather than issues that they might have had. But I definitely think some of the things, and they're always the same things: recruitment and retention, how to find the right staff, what they might have done as well to, I find there's definitely a trend with outstanding leaders, is how much they trust their staff to do things and how much they empower their staff, and seem to have that great support system around them. You know, it's not, no man is an island. They didn't get there by themselves, and they all recognise that. So I think having a strong team around you.
Moving on to your book now, because it's all about leadership.
Yes.
But it isn't, but it is. So this is the book, the Care Leader's Handbook, and it is very much a handbook, something that you'd want to revisit, I think. And if we just have a quick flick through, it's very accessible and also has lots of resources, lots of tips, lots of graphs, lots of things you could basically just lift out of it and use in your own organisation, or it inspires thoughts. So one of the things that you talk about in your book, which I feel is being recognised a bit more at the moment, is that recognising the leadership qualities of everybody, so all of your team, and moving away from the traditional way of managing, which is very top down, and thinking, well, actually everybody is a leader. Can you just talk a bit about what you mean by everybody is a leader?
Yeah, I like that you've picked up on that as well, because that's obviously a key message within the book. So we run leadership academies. My dad's background is as a performance coach. I grew up on my summer holidays sat in the back of a room somewhere pretending not to listen while he was doing this training, and obviously a lot of it kind of sunk in somewhere along the line. So we run these academies and workshops for care companies and all sorts of different industries, and I think that's the thing, is a lot of what is in here can be applied, whether you are a care team, whether you are a kitchen team, whether you are a hospitality team. The ethos around everybody as a leader, and I think I've experienced it where I've asked a question during speaking at a conference, and I've said, hands up if you're a leader, and only a few hands ever go up. And I think even if you're not sat in this conference as a manager or a director or an owner of a care company, you are still a leader. And if you're not, you are the leader of who you care for. You may be the leader of a small team. You might just be a team leader, not just be a team leader, but that might be where you are now. And if you're not the leader of anyone else, you're at least the leader of yourself. And I think if we can instill this kind of leadership ethos throughout a company, like I said, it provides the manager with more support, and then that will filter through. And I think if you can have a culture built around leadership, where people do step up, where people can take responsibility, and where people feel like they have some control over what they do within their role, it can be really empowering. And I think that's where we need to get to.
Which is fantastic, because you talk about different leadership styles, and sometimes people think, well, I've got to have a certain type of style, but also it depends who you're working with and which type of member of staff that you're relating to. You might have to employ different styles. Do you think that that's kind of the way to go, or is it better to identify a style and then to stick to it?
Well, it's an interesting one. I think if you only ever have one style of leadership, you're only ever going to resonate with a small percentage of the people you work with. They will resonate with that style, but there'll be many others that don't. And I think I love this topic because if you ever, I don't know if you can remember back when you first stepped into a leadership position, mine was that I was working in a bar and I got promoted to manager. So as I was kind of, 19, 20, suddenly I was the leader of all my friends, and it's a really difficult role to step into because what we see often is that people will either go to this kind of dictator style of leadership that I'm sure people will sort of chuckle and know somebody that might have done that, where you think the way for me to have authority, the way for me to show that I'm the leader is to tell people what to do and kind of have this very kind of dictator style, we call it a command style of leadership. Or people go to what we call the affiliative style of leadership, which is, we're all still friends, I still want to be friends with everyone. And the danger with that is that people can get walked over if you're like that. And so how do you find that balance, particularly new leaders and people who are newly promoted? That can be a really big struggle, and that's something that we really wanted to address in the book, and that's why we say this book is for managers, team leaders, deputies. People are always stepping into a role where they have to adjust, and the key with it, to answer the question, is we promote a flexible style of leadership. What is appropriate for the scenario, what's appropriate for the situation that you're in, what's appropriate for the people that are around you. If CQC were walking up the driveway right now, I would like my manager probably to adopt a bit of a commanding style of leadership. Right, action stations, everybody, this is what I want you to do. And I think the staff would appreciate and resonate that style at that time. If you're organising a family barbecue, it might be a more appropriate time to be a bit more affiliative with the staff and say, right, everyone, how can we work this event together? And kind of, people might not need to be told what to do and given as much direction at that time. So it's about being able to be flexible. I
think that's really helpful because leadership is just so high on the agenda for so many different reasons. So you've got the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, the regulator, who will put quite a large emphasis, I think, on well-led, one of the key lines of inquiry that they look at when they inspect. And so there's a lot of pressure on the manager to be the right type of manager. And then you've also got the problem, like you say, when you move up position. So if you are putting people on that career progression, you most likely will have someone who's been a care worker, who's then a team leader, who's then a supervisor, or the other way around, and then they become a manager. So, and they've worked with their team for years, and then suddenly they've got to deliver on KPIs, or they've got deadlines that they need to, and then everything gets a bit stressful. So it's the idea of how do you keep all, do you need a style or not? And it's really refreshing for you to say, well, actually, just be flexible, and also just be you, probably. Don't lose who you are as a person. Yeah,
and I think it's that thing, you quite often see it, that people get promoted because they're good at their job, and they might never, we go into companies that are outstanding rated companies, but the team have never had any kind of leadership training before, because a lot of the training is always management training or paperwork or, the sort of things that are obviously crucial, vital within a care organisation. But actually, how do you lead? How do you get the best out of people? And really, leading and leadership, it's about being able to influence people to positive outcomes, I think, and get the best out of the team, get the results that you want, and what is the best way to do that. If you walk into a team where everybody's fighting and everybody's cliquey and it's a bad culture within there, that might need a particular style, and that style might need to be no nonsense. But if you walk into a team where everybody's really well gelled, confident, capable, that style might not go down very well with that team. So it's about thinking about it. And there's you can go online, there's lots of different free quizzes that you can take to work out what leadership style you're using the most right now. That's not necessarily right or wrong, and we do have one in the book as well that people can take. And it's about thinking about that style and then thinking, have there been scenarios where I should have changed it, or I should have been a bit more flexible, and could I have got a better result?
It's almost like a critical reflective practice. But when I did read the book, and your definition that you've got is this one, and I really like it. So leadership definition is a process of social influence which maximises the efforts of others towards the achievement of a determined outcome. And what I liked about that is the social influence, because it's not just influencing the organisation, it's thinking about all the different people that are involved in that organisation, and it's a lot wider than just the people who are immediately with you. And I think that's a different focus, and that kind of like makes sense in a caring environment, because it's a social job, if you like. Maximising efforts as well. Obviously, you're looking at your different skills of your staff, and you're thinking, well, how can I help them to be the best that they can be? And then obviously looking towards an actual outcome, so being focused and what are we here for? Why are we doing it? So I really like that definition, and I might just get it printed and put it up on a plaque somewhere in my organisation.
I think the key with it as well is that it's not about you.
Yeah.
And I think if you wanted to just condense that right down, I think that would be almost a good definition of leadership. Is it's not about you. It's about what you can draw out of other people and have them be their best. So
like a facilitator, basically.
Yes,
Enabler, is that the right word? Enabling the best.
Yes.
Okay. So the next question is about coaching your staff. So you talk a little bit about it in the book and how it's really important to support the manager by making sure that the staff are well supported. So how important is coaching your staff?
It's very important. It's probably the simple answer. And I think what we've found, and you know, we've worked with so many care companies, and we've asked people, do you coach your staff? And they think they do. But when you dig down to it, actually, it's a lot easier to tell people what to do when you're in a busy care environment. You've got that morning meeting perhaps where you've got 5 quiet minutes before everything sort of turns to chaos. In the end, it's a lot easier if you as the manager know the answer to give the answer. And it's how can we start thinking about how can we change this? Because if you can coach your staff to find the answers from within themselves. And coaching is about asking open questions. It's as simple as that. And I think a really good way of people thinking, do I coach? Am I coaching, or am I actually telling? Is the next time a staff member comes to you with an issue or a problem, try not to tell them anything. Try to only ask questions. Now, we do this as a practical exercise when we work with care companies, and it's amazing how difficult it is. And I know how difficult it is. You know the answer, and you just think, it would be so much easier if I just gave them the answer. But if they can find it within themselves, then you have then helped almost empower that person then to think, okay, I can do this for myself. And if you can start, that's the first place to just start to make those kind of incremental gains within the company where people are starting to be coached rather than told.
So when's the best time to do coaching? Because you have supervisions. Is that the time to coach? Or I feel like what you're saying, it's almost like you're doing it throughout your conversations with staff all the time.
Yeah, and I think we talk about this. Coaching can be a sit-down conversation, a supervision, scheduled. But you can also just coach. My dad always says, on the hoof. You know, as you're walking around, you could say to somebody, let's go and take a quick walk in the garden and talk about something that's coming up, and just start asking, okay, how do you think you would do this? What do you think we should do? And just try and tease it out of them. And I think your staff might surprise you that they do have it there, and sometimes it's just the confidence.
It is, and I think sometimes your staff will surprise you, but they'll also surprise themselves, because a lot of the time staff might come to you to say, if you've got an open door policy, it's great because they could just ask their manager anytime, they can ask them a question. But a lot of the time they actually know the answers, but they almost want validation.
Yes.
So it's almost changing the culture of, well, actually, you probably might know the answer, but just you can check it with me, but you probably know what you need to do anyway. So it's giving them that confidence.
Yes. it's coming back to that developing. It's all part of developing a leadership culture. But I think there's some important things that you need to have in place. I think if staff feel like there's potentially a bit of a blame culture within the care environment, or they feel like they could get in trouble if they do the wrong thing, then that might be the reason why they're coming to you for that validation. So it's, unfortunately, there's never a sticking plaster answer that you can just apply. There's always other things to think about. But yeah, you're right. If people are coming to you asking questions and you think they know the answer, just try and get into that habit of everything that comes out of my mouth is going to be a question. And it's difficult, but it can be fun as well.
Yeah, you've got to really kind of get into it. I like the way that you linked sort of like culture and values, and you talk about culture statements. Can you explain a little bit about what culture statements are?
Yes. It's my favourite topic, I think. So we talk about values a lot within care. The biggest problem with care company values is they're often the same. So if you took 3 care homes in the same town, for example, they probably might have the value of caring, respect, integrity,
dignity.
Yes, exactly. They're very often the same. So how do you differentiate? Because if the values are the same, their meaning can get lost. They can become just words on a wall or words in a handbook or on a website. That if you said to the staff, and this is a really good thing for people to do, go and grab someone in the hallway and say, do you know what our values are? If they can name them, then great, but then say to them, what do they mean? And that's where people will come unstuck, being able to actually describe what it means to be caring. Because this is sometimes people struggle to sort of understand this, but the word respect can mean something slightly different in one home to another. And it's about how can we actually have the staff own these values. And I think the best way to get them to own them is to what I call create culture statements. So get your team together, have a little workshop, as many as you can, or however you divide it up, and ask them to think about those values. Take a value and say, what would you like this to mean? And a key thing here is to have it what it means for them rather than what it means for the residents or the clients, because the chances are everything you do is about the clients anyway. So how can we develop some meaning around these words for the team? And actually, your team might come up with, well, respect means we talk to each other the same way we talk to with the same amount of respect as we talk to our clients. Because you'll probably find there'll be ways that they don't talk to the client that they would talk to each other. And so how can you develop these then into more of a sentence that embodies what it means to live those values?
That's a great way of doing it. In fact, that's one of the things that we started doing in our care organisation. We didn't call them culture statements at the time because the book hadn't been released. But it's sort of thing that we did in induction, and we asked people to look at our values and do have a big piece of paper and describe how they would internalise them, exactly what you're saying, and what do those values mean to them, because they're not what the values mean to me. They have to work and live and breathe them. So they have to, in a way, understand it in a way that it makes sense to them. So I think that's a really good way of coming at it, because like you say, a lot of the times you do have these values and they're great and it's a really good focus, but if they're just stuck up on walls and people aren't really embedding it into their practice, then they're a bit useless.
And there's so much you can do with them once you've done that as well. Because once the staff then agree, yes, this is how we would like to behave, this is what we would like to live by when we're at work, then it can start to shift a culture. The staff then also feel that they're being included in these sorts of decisions. And I know a lot of care companies will say, well, we have a marketing company that decided our values, so we can't change our values. That's not to say that you can't adapt those words to fit what the staff want the culture to be, that they can buy into.
Perfect. So we're going to move on to now some social media engagement questions. So we've been out to Facebook and Twitter and people have asked some questions. The first one is from Nicholas Key Mew, I think that's how you say it. And the question is, they say they're trying not to mention Brexit, but they're interested to ask how we compete with big supermarkets where they offer well over the minimum wages.
Yes, this is a difficult question, but I'm going to try. So this is what I think people need to think about. and I haven't worked in a supermarket, so I can't talk from experience in that sense. But if I think about what a supermarket offers and what my care company offers, so the local supermarket, you could even do this in a column, pros, cons. The local supermarket is going to offer a better salary, potentially. And I think a lot of people think that just instantly means that people will go for a better salary. And there are people who will be money motivated. I know people who would leave a lovely job to go and work somewhere that pays more, even if the job ends up being horrible. And yes, they might then realise that the grass is greener and come back. Or yes, potentially you might lose people to wages. But what can differentiate you as a care company from a supermarket? Now, from a distance, I would think that you could have a far better culture within a care home. I walk into care homes where you feel like you're walking into a home, a lovely place, really warm, everybody's very friendly. Supermarkets, from my distance, they look quite clinical. Are they building a culture, or do people literally go in and do their shift and go home?
So it's almost like differentiating yourself and saying, well, it's more than just the pay. This is like the whole package that you're
Yes.
with. So you're really having to kind of like pick out what your unique selling point is,
Yeah.
or what you're differentiating yourself from the others, and how it's positive.
Because if you think about it, people go into care because they're caring.
Yeah.
And so they probably want that interaction. They want to have a friendly environment. They want to feel valued and feel like they're giving back to other people. I don't know how much of that you would get from working in a supermarket. And I'm not saying you don't get any of it, but I think this is the way that care companies need to think about. It doesn't just come down to money. So what can we do?
Yeah.
I think something with a supermarket, potentially people can come in and do their shift and go home and forget about work. How much is your care company letting people do that? Or are people actually being bombarded when they're at home with WhatsApp messages? Or is there a pressure to kind of fill shifts that could make people potentially stressed, that makes them think it would be easier to go and work in a supermarket? So it's thinking about all of those.
Yeah.
But I think all is not lost just because a supermarket pays more. I think we have to start thinking creatively on what care offers.
Absolutely. And this is a question from Suzanne, and she's asking, when there are difficult times, so for example, high levels of sickness or annual leave, do you have any tips on how to keep staff motivated?
On the spot.
Yeah.
I think the important thing at a time like that, coming back to leadership styles, if staff are tired, if people are off sick, if staff are pulling together, are they feeling valued for what they're doing?
Yeah.
And this may be a time for you to think about your leadership style and think, this is a time for me to be affiliative. The team are in the dirt a little bit, like things are not great, so I need to be there with them, not up here. I need to now help them to see that I am one of them. I do understand. Obviously, if there's things that you can do, I appreciate there's not always. Sometimes you just have to get through that difficult period. But I think that's a time where your team needs to feel like you understand and you're one of them.
Absolutely. And I think in those situations, it's very easy for a manager or a coordinator or someone who's doing the rotas to think, I'm so stressed, I just need to be really strict and use that top-down approach. And actually, that will make people feel even more stressed. That will increase stress levels. So like you say, if you're actually thinking, okay, we're a team, we can get through this. And even just doing nice things maybe at the end of it, and just a little gift or a lunch or whatever you can do, just makes people think, right, we got through that really tough time of massive annual leave and it's fine, and just appreciating people. So understanding your style, it comes back to that really. So Debbie has asked, what has been your greatest work challenge?
I think for me, the story that I told earlier, where I stepped into this leadership role, where suddenly I was in charge of people who were my friends. And that was really a time where I started to think, how do I now manage this bar? It doesn't sound, it was like a night bar, very busy bar.
Yeah.
And how do I step into this role at quite a young age? And I wasn't just managing bar staff, I was managing doormen, who can be quite difficult, having a young 19-year-old telling them what to do. How do I manage this? I really did turn to my dad at that point and sort of came back to the things that he'd been training for so many years about leadership. One of the things which I did, which became a habit to the point that it became a joke in a good way, is that at the end of every single shift, when everybody was cleaning at the end of the evening, and I'd always muck in and clean as well, I would always say to everybody before we left, thank you everyone, you've all done a great job. No matter if it was a good night, bad night, indifferent. And it became a habit so much that the doorman would kind of prompt me to say it. He said, he would say, you've all done very well. And I'm sure if I saw him today, many years on, he would still be able to quote that back to me. And I think it's worth remembering that people are coming in and they're delivering care, and it is a tough job. And so how often are you saying thank you? Or is it just... It so easily get forgotten, but that can make a really big difference to people.
I think that's spot on. A lot of the time when you have staff who are disgruntled, it's just because that their hard work hasn't been recognised or they haven't been shown compassion. So I think just explaining how you got through those challenges is really helpful. So the next question is from Flora, and she wants to know, how much do you think the stigma around health and social care or health and social care workers has affected the industry?
Yeah, this needs to change, doesn't it? And I think it's something now that people are really working towards, and I think everyone that works within care has come to that realisation that we need to promote a positive narrative to go along with care. Every time, my grandma will phone me and say, I saw in the news about something that happened within a care home, and I'm just, so frustrated about it.
Which is almost why you did your podcast, because you had so many positive stories.
Yeah.
Actually, I was interested to find out what was your favourite podcast? Do you have a favourite one?
There are so many where people shared so much that you could take from. I would say one of my most fun ones, and as we're in Bristol today, I'd have to say when I interviewed Mary and Marina from Gogglebox.
How did that come about?
They live in a assisted living home that's run by St Monica's Trust, and they were great. I wouldn't say their interview is particularly useful in terms of they told stories and they were wonderful to speak to, and they were really good fun, and most of the things that they said off camera were better than what they said in the podcast, but I couldn't put any of it in. But yeah, I think they were great to meet, lovely ladies.
That is the joy of it, actually getting those personalities, the people who are using the care services, finding out about them and their lives. It's not just about a task that we're performing.
Yes.
I think that doesn't really get represented in the media at all, and actually that helps people understand that it could be any of us. It's people dealing with people. Sometimes when you take away all the bureaucracy and the a different level of management and all the other stuff that we have to do, we're just people at the end of the day, so showing that is lovely.
One thing that I saw recently, I don't know if anybody watches Love Island, but one of the girls in Love Island said she was a model and a carer, and I just could have cheered at the TV screen and they started asking her about it, and I thought, please let them shine some light on this. And I think we need more of that. I think we also need more celebrities that might have family that are having care provided to them to be able to talk about it, and just kind of let's lift this sector a bit more, and start getting that positive narrative out there.
That's so important. I mean, did they, I don't watch it, and I feel like I need to go and watch it. Did she talk, or he talk about?
She just said that she was a carer,
right?
And there was a few comments about, what a wonderful person she was, that she was delivering care.
It's a positive thing. Yeah, that's
so
lovely.
I do hope that they pick that back up again in the series, because I think it was great to see that on a show that you would never expect care to be brought up.
Perfect. And another question is about your top tips on creating a good work-life balance for those in leadership roles.
Yes.
And that's from Flora.
Okay. I know this is so difficult because I'm somebody that works from home and works in the evening and works on the weekends, and how do you then create that work-life balance? So I think an important thing to remember is that there is something that's coming out more and more now. They call it leavism, which is when people are working when they shouldn't be working. So whether they're on holiday or whether it's the weekend. And obviously that can create burnout as well. And then people aren't going to get the best out of work. So it is really important to find things outside of work that fulfill you, so that you can have some time for yourself. I think with care in particular, the energy tends to go outwards to other people. So how do you preserve some of that energy for yourself, and how do you, basically recharge your batteries outside of work? I've got some personal opinions on things such as using WhatsApp for work. I don't think WhatsApp should be used as a means of communication, because people use it for personal reasons. And I know I've worked in environments where you have WhatsApp messages coming in from your manager, and it can cause stress at home. And so look at alternatives, look at other messaging platforms that are more work orientated, that can make that separation for you.
And also, presumably, if you are a leader who's open to staff coming to you and just saying, actually, the style of working isn't working for me, or I'm feeling a bit stressed, or I haven't got my well-being together, then if you're an open manager, you can have that dialogue with them, and you can work it out together. And that's got to be quite a helpful way of leading.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So the next question that we have is, how important is the quality of recruitment on how long people stay in a job?
Oh, I don't know. I couldn't pull some stats out off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I think this is the important thing to remember. We get called in sometimes to work with people on recruitment, but if the culture is not right within the home, or I always say home, but any care company, if the culture's not right, if you hire good people, they'll leave quicker.
Yeah.
Because they won't stick around for a bad culture. They'll know they can get appreciated somewhere else. So it's not just, yes, hiring the right people is so crucial, but you need to have the right culture in place.
Great. So you've got to be the right company that people want to work for. It's not just about having an amazing squeaky clean recruitment campaign. You've got to be the right company to work for.
And don't get me wrong, if you bring somebody in who's a bad apple, then yes, there's that phrase that it will spoil the rest of the apple cart. But it's important to not just focus on one thing, because you'll miss something else. You've got to look at it holistically. It's across the whole operation, really.
Great lesson. So then what we're going to move on to now are our cactus questions. We have our cactus, our resident cactus. So those are pricky questions about health and social care. So, first cactus question is about something you mentioned on one of your podcasts, your last podcast, and you said that your podcasts have represented 41 women and 20 men in the interviews that you've done. And, that's a great stat, because there are a lot of women who are working in social care, health and social care, but also there are some men working in it as well. Do you think that there needs to be more representation of certain groups in certain positions in health and social care? Does that really matter?
I think it does matter, and I know that equality is something that's being talked about a lot, and I've said on the podcast a few times, I'm a bit of a feminist, so I was quite proud of that stat that I'd interviewed a lot of women for the podcast. I think that there are definitely more women working in social care than men, but I think when you start to look towards the top, there are more men in senior leadership positions, and I think it's just important that whoever you are in care, if you want to go on that journey and you want to be able to see that pathway to the top, that you can see somebody that you can relate to. So I think it's really important that people support each other and that we do start seeing, particularly as well, I think, I've interviewed younger managers who have talked about their struggles of being quite young and how they're perceived as managers being young. I've talked with women in leadership positions that have talked about potential struggles that they might have had getting to that senior position. And I just think it's important that we have these conversations, and that if somebody who is a care professional who could be, let's say, quite fresh out of school or college, and they're thinking, oh, could I potentially be the next CEO of Skills for Care, or, you know, chief inspector, or whatever they want to be, they can see that there is a pathway to get there.
What do you think is holding people or women back sometimes from these very senior positions? Because you'll have women managers, but then you might not see as many women CEOs. And yet there's so many women who work in social care on the ground.
Yeah.
Is there something that's stopping? Is there like a glass ceiling? I suppose in all organisations, not just care, there probably is. There is anyway. But you know, you just think with the caring profession, because it is so heavy with the amount of women that are employed. Do you think there's any theme or reason why that might be?
I don't know. I know certainly within care, the work that we've done within care, when we have used the assessment to look at people working in care, we do see confidence as an issue. I'm not necessarily saying that confidence is an issue at that senior level, but certainly with the general care sort of levels that we work with, we do see that confidence and self-esteem is very often a development area that comes out in every care organisation. So how do we start to build people's confidence to actually think, I can get there? One thing that I think, even within, let's say you're a single independent care home or domiciliary company, is find somebody who has progressed. Or even if you're a manager and you started as a care professional, you started part-time then tell that story, because somebody could hear that story and then be inspired by that.
Yes,
so I think that's important.
Yeah, so it's all about sharing your story, but also maybe even mentoring people to have that link and to show them, actually, I was in your position before, but you can absolutely do the same.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. The next one is some questions. You're used to asking questions with your podcast, so this is okay. But we've got a couple of people that we're interviewing in the next few weeks. The first one is Roney, who's the Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care at the Care Quality Commission, CQC. So, you know, in the ethos, spirit of opening up the care debate and asking other people to ask the questions, what question, or maybe you have a couple, for Kate, would you ask?
I think it would be nice to ask Kate about taking the position and how it felt stepping into that position, and what things did she put into place to support herself as she was kind of transitioning into that important role, because I think that's something that as well a lot of people could relate to. If you're being brought in as a brand new manager into a company, how does that transition work? And she might have some great tips on how she took that role.
Yeah. And the other person that we're interviewing is Caroline Dinenage, and she's the Minister of State at the Department of Health and Social Care. So I was wondering if you had any sort of government type questions for her.
I've definitely a cactus question. I'd be a bit cheeky and ask about how we can get Matt Hancock to talk more about social care, and maybe she could help with that as well. I frequently comment on his Twitter when he talks about the NHS, and I say, don't forget social care. And I think we all feel that way, so how can we sort of prompt that action from them? Maybe Caroline can help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also wearing things like the care badge.
Yes.
So you've got the NHS badge, you're wearing the care badge today.
Yes.
So if we can start getting NHS people to wear the care badge, or maybe have a joint effort and have an NHS and care badge.
Yeah.
Because it almost seems in your mind, when you think about care, just bizarre that we have these two like separate things.
And I think if you ask somebody on the street, what's Matt Hancock's role, they'd probably say NHS. And that's a problem. We need to address that.
Absolutely. That was great. I really enjoyed that, and I learned so much from it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know that you're on Twitter, and you have the Judgement Index has its website. So if people want to learn more about you, then we will include that all in the description box of the interview.
Perfect.
Is there anything else? Are you blogging or?
I think the best place for people to find more information is the website.
Okay.
And we've got lots on there. We've got some research that we've done with outstanding rated managers. We've got links to our brochure, which talks all about our leadership workshops, and people can have a look at what we do, some YouTube videos. But feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
And you're all over the country, so you advise everywhere. That's great. Okay, thank you so much, Sophie.
Thank
I really
you.
enjoyed it.